All right, welcome back to my channel. Hi, hello, this is my face. Obviously, if you know me in real life, you're used to this, but most of you are going to be seeing me for the first time. It's just something new we're trying out. Anyway, so what I want to discuss today is something that I briefly touched on in my book, Georgia Wildman, and then I touched on it again in a shorter podcast episode that I've now deleted in favor of this more in-depth analysis. But I want to talk about Kecleh Kudleh. What is it? Why is it wrong? And what is the correct answer? So if you've been in the Bigfoot community for a while now, you've probably seen the name Kecleh Kudleh floating around as a Cherokee term meaning hairy man or hairy savage or hairy giant. And specifically, it refers supposedly to Bigfoot. It's a term that's been reiterated in books, in blogs, in podcasts, even by some of the most prominent names in cryptozoology. And unfortunately, it's completely wrong. So I want to dispel some of that misinformation and provide the true meaning. So the story of Kecleh Kudleh began in 1793. There was an article published in several newspapers, magazines across the country, but it was an article out of Charleston, South Carolina, a letter really, that was published, and it reads, "A gentleman on the South Fork of the Saluda River, in a letter of the 23rd ultimate, sends his correspondent in this city the following description of an extraordinary animal which has been lately discovered on the Bald Mountain and on other mountains in the Western Territory. This animal is between 12 and 15 feet high, and in shape resembles a human being, except the head, which is equal in proportion to its body and draws in somewhat like a terrapin. Its feet are like those of a black person, about 2 feet long and hairy, which is of a dark dun color. Its eyes are exceedingly large and open and shut up and down its face. The hair of its head is about 6 inches long, stands straight like a black person's. Its nose is that of the human species, only large and inclined to what is called Roman. These animals are bold and have lately attempted to kill several persons, in which attempts some of them have been shot. Their principal resort is on the Bald Mountain, where they lie in wait for travelers, but some have been seen in this part of the country. The inhabitants of this place call it Yahoo. The Indians, however, give it the name of Chickly Cudly." So that article was rediscovered in 1995 and was reprinted in volume 52 of the Track Record, which was the Western Bigfoot Society newsletter edited by Ray Crow, which prompted a letter from one Benoit Crevier that was included in volume 53 of the newsletter in 1996. Crevier was the one who had brought the article to the attention of the Western Bigfoot Society and was disappointed with the way that Ray Crow had published it. In his follow-up letter, complaining and then also explaining, he wrote that Chickly Cudly was most likely Cherokee in origin, as Chickly was similar to Kecleh, the Cherokee word for hair, according to the work of Luigi Castiglione, who we will discuss in a bit. Crevier further speculated that Chickly Cudly would roughly translate to hairy man, just like so many other indigenous terms for Bigfoot. From there, the baton was passed to the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, relatively famous organization, probably needs no explanation. Anyway, an archive of the BFRO website shows that the original Chickly Cudly article from 1793 was reprinted as Media Article 293 with commentary by Scott McNabb. In his notes, Scott cites Track Record Volume 53 and mentions that he had heard Kudleh meant man bear or bear thing, but that he couldn't find a reference for this in print. So first and foremost, I want to make it clear that I mean no disrespect to Benoit Crevier or Scott McNabb or anyone else that has reprinted the term Kecleh Kudleh over the years. Anyone doing the research in an honest and methodical way has my respect, especially in the 1990s. These people were actually going to libraries and reading books. And that's just something that I have to respect. But it's just really frustrating, unfortunately, that it's been almost 30 years and no one thought to check the Googles for any other Cherokee language resources to double check what was done. So we're left with a situation where we're constantly putting out this term as a Cherokee term, but some very simple cross-referencing online shows that Castiglione was not a reliable resource in general, and in this case was actually incorrect. Okay, so Luigi Castiglione was a famous Italian scientist who traveled throughout the United States in the 1780s, and then he published all of his notes in 1790 in a book with a very long Italian name, but most people just call it Viaggio. Anyway, Viaggio broadly covered a bunch of different topics, a bunch of different aspects of American culture and history, natural history, culture of the both white and native populations, multiple tribes of native populations. So it's a very valuable resource. Unfortunately, when it comes to the Cherokee word list that he included, it is by no means the best resource available. Castiglione received his Cherokee word list from a friend of a friend. It doesn't match any other translation of hair from any other word list or dictionary. And some of the other words are off too, but this is where hair is the relevant word here. The next closest translation to Kecleh was Gili. That was included by John Haywood in 1823 in his work Natural and Aboriginal History, of Tennessee. Gili was probably a misspelling of Gitlu, as documented by James Mooney in the 1890s, or Gitla, as documented by Durbin Feeling in 1975. But Feeling makes it very clear that Gitla means loose hair, not hairy. This is a really important distinction in Cherokee. It's a language in which darn near every single word is conjugated. So we need to make sure we're using the right words. And the Raven Rock Dictionary, which is based on the work of Dr. Dwayne King, makes it very clear that he is hairy is Yuwana, and the Cherokee Nation online word list translates hairy as Yu-Wu-Ya-Duh. So neither of those sound like Chickly or Cudly, so that's just not right. Not to mention that the Cherokee word lists from Mooney to modern day all universally translate man as Isgaya and bear as Yona. So whatever indigenous term the gentleman meant on the South Fork of the Saluda River, it did not mean hairy man, hairy savage, hairy giant, hairy man bear thing, or any other version you see online. So the first thing I want to do in this exercise is to confirm that Cherokee is in fact the correct indigenous language. Our only clues to this are the location of the correspondent and the location of the Bigfoot. The correspondent is said to live on the South Fork of the Saluda River, it's a very short branch of the Saluda River, very close to the origin of the river. It's in the far northwest corner of South Carolina. And the Cherokee did not relinquish their land in that area until a treaty in 1816. So they would very much have been present in the area of the South Fork in 1793. And then the Bigfoot is said to have been discovered on the Bald Mountain and in the Western Territories. In his notes on the BFRO website, Scott McNabb points out that these would be the mountains in the Bald Mountain Range on the Tennessee-North Carolina border. I completely agree with this. And given the location of the correspondent and the time period of the correspondent's letter, the Western Territories would refer to East Tennessee. This was something that was in contention in that Trek Record newsletter because Ray Crow said that it would have been in Australia, but that's absolutely not the case. So the counties of East Tennessee were the Western Territories of North Carolina. They were relinquished to the federal government in 1790, and so for sure in 1793, pretty much everyone in the area would still understand that Western Territories meant the counties of East Tennessee. So we've got a correspondent in the far northwest corner of South Carolina in Cherokee Territory, and we've got Bigfoots in the Bald Mountain Range on the Tennessee-North Carolina border in Cherokee Territory. We can feel pretty confident that Cherokee is the correct language. As a disclaimer, before we get into the translation, I want to say that one, incredibly complex language is Cherokee, right? It is a level 3 or level 4, something like that. It's much harder than English. Like I said, darn near every word is conjugated, and I don't have any degree of fluency. And then two, I want to say that all of my pronunciations are wrong. If you want to have a better understanding of the pronunciations of the Cherokee language, talk to somebody who's Cherokee. I am not. I just think of this as a puzzle in my little engineer brain. So I'm thinking of this as a puzzle, not a foreign language. I am just using the internet and putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Okay? Okay, so to start, we want to break Chickly Cudly down to the syllable. The Cherokee language does not use letters like we do in English. They have a syllabary, not an alphabet. So the syllabary breaks everything down into syllables. So we need to break everything down into syllables to compare directly to those sounds. Okay, this is how we get the most accurate transliteration so that we can then translate it into English. Now, these don't have exact equivalents. So we have to use historical examples of what I will call white American bastardized Cherokee to see how those Cherokee words would have been represented by white Americans at the time. For example, even the word Cherokee is a bastardized version of Tsalagi, right? So this is how we're going to go through this. Now, Chickly breaks into chi, ki, and li. The first syllable is actually the first problem in Luigi's word list. The syllable universally written as ch in white American bastardized Cherokee is ts. The most obvious example of this is, like I said, Cherokee, right? So in the Cherokee language, Cherokee is tsalagi. The fun fact, the R sound comes from the lower dialect of the Cherokee language, which is now extinct. They used the L's as R's, I guess. I don't know. All documented by James Mooney. I don't really understand it, but it is what it is. So for the first syllable, we have to have t, not k. Kecleh, first problem. K is not how you would do chickly, right? Chickly has to be t, ch, ts, ch, ts, okay? So we start with t. Then we have the k sound. And Cherokee is weird here too. So the k sound is actually, you might think of the C sound in like a hard C in English being kind of similar to a K. Well, in Cherokee, K and G are the same, right? So their g, their G sounds like a K. So the G syllable, or well, what we would pronounce as k, for those of us who can't actually speak Cherokee, is actually a g syllable, and this would be, it can be written with a G or a K. It kind of depends. Some sources, when they're writing the syllabary into Latin script, will use a K, I think probably just to make it easier on those of us that are English language speakers, because our G is so different from the K, but really the G would be more correct. So you will see some word lists that will take the same word and write it with a G, and some that will write it with a K. Either way, it's the same syllable in the Cherokee syllabary. So then Cudly breaks down to Kudleh. Again, the K sound that we would speak in English or white American bastardized Cherokee represents the G sound in actual Cherokee. And then also to differentiate between the long U and the short U, the U sound versus the sound, Cherokee will use a V when it's written in Latin script to represent that short U, that sound. Just like the word cup, that would be a V in Cherokee representation in Latin script. So the first syllable of cuddly is going to be a GV, that g, k kind of sound. And then the duh sound, it would probably either be a DV or a DU, kind of depends on how you wiggle that through. So it'd be g, duh, or g-do, g-duh or g-do, right? And then that lee sound is just the same. So we either have gaduli or gadali, something like that. Now this is not a word that you can just look up on a Cherokee word list. It's something that we're going to have to fill in the gaps a little bit more. One thing that I noticed is that it's very close to agadulo, which is, it's a word that's documented in multiple Eastern Cherokee sources. Again, Eastern, it means mask. Now, the Eastern distinction is important. Western sources have a different word for mask. So, for example, the Cherokee Nation online word list has mask as adutlododi, Anyway, but married Ulmer Chiltosky, who was married to an Eastern Band woodcarver and lived among the Eastern Band for 6 decades, and the Raven Rock Dictionary, which was based on Dr. Dwayne King's work with the Eastern Band for his doctoral thesis, they both list mask as agadulo. Now, again, we'll come back to the fact that I said that most words in Cherokee are conjugated. Far more than we would be used to in English. Now, we actually have a representation of how agadulo is conjugated in a way that actually resembles Kudleh. Speck and Broom wrote a book, Cherokee Dance and Drama. They talk about all the different types of Cherokee dances, the ways they're used, etc., etc., etc. They list the Cherokee name for the infamous booger dance as Tsunigaduli, meaning many persons' faces covered over, from agadulo, meaning mask. Now, the tsuni is basically, it acts as like a plural object for the masked adjective, if that makes sense. So you may have heard of Sulkalu, the famous giant of Cherokee lore. Tsunilkalu, where it's that tsuni at that front, that would be the plural form of Sulkalu. So that tsuni in Tsunigaduli is kind of like the plural object of the adjective. So Gaduli, that leaves Gaduli as the adjective. And Gaduli is very close to Kudleh, presumably if you were to pronounce it correctly, it would sound more like that. So altogether, Chickly Cudly is not Kecleh Kudleh at all. It is Chickly Cudly, or something like that, if you were to pronounce it correctly again. And so that means something sort of along the lines of masked ghost, masked witch, masked owl, masked night traveler, nocturnal one. And the important note that I mentioned earlier and I wanted to come back to was that the Cherokee did not separate the concepts of like a ghost, an owl, and a witch like we do today. So, for example, per James Mooney, the owl was often considered the the embodiment of a ghost, like almost like a possessed, like a ghost would kind of possess an owl. Or something like that. It was like a manifestation of a human ghost. And partially this was because of the whole nocturnal thing. And then it was also sort of because of the whole like creepy thing. Owls were also believed to be disguised witches. I guess they were sort of like shape-shifting witches that would take on the form of an owl. Again, nocturnal, creepy. To the point where the Chickly, the witch, was actually used by Cherokee parents as like a boogeyman figure to keep their kids from wandering too far from home, particularly at night. Something that's also really interesting is that there's a photo housed in the Smithsonian collection of the William Duncan Strong papers. It depicts a clay diorama, I guess, of a booger dance. But it's labeled the Cherokee Masked Ghost Dance. Now, they're referring to it as a ghost dance, like an Indian ghost dance, while wearing masks, not a dance of masked ghosts. But it is a really interesting synchronicity because, and I don't actually have like firm evidence for this, direct evidence for this, but I personally am of the opinion that the booger dance originated as sort of like a protection dance to ward off some sort of relic hominoid. Doesn't even have to be Bigfoot. Could have been a Neanderthal. Hard to say. It's just that there's so much overlap between the booger dance and the various aspects of the Lupercalia festival and, well, the original Lupercalia festival, because that actually sort of changed over the hundreds of years that it was celebrated. But that Lupercalia festival in Rome has, well, in my mind, TP-wise been proved that it is a representation or a festival honoring the satyr god Pan. Well, Dmitry Bayanov, famous cryptozoologist or hominologist, I guess, as he would say, to my mind also proved distinctly that the satyrs were originally depicted as wild men, not as these like goat men hybrids. So again, it's an educated hunch, I'll say. a working hypothesis, if you will, but it's just something that we're probably never going to be able to prove because the booger dance is so old that there's just no way to sort out its true origins. According to the Cherokee lore, it was given to them by Stonecoat when he passed away. And some have said that Stonecoat is a Bigfoot figure, but I'm skeptical of that because there's so many astrotheological elements of his story. For example, he was defeated by 7 menstruating women. Well, that clearly refers to 7 moons. And in the Cherokee cycle of life, they kind of honored 7 or two seasons of 7 moons. Well, I guess it would be, one would probably end up being 6 because there's like 13 moons in a year. But either way, to me, that's like, okay, it's a season of life, right? It's clearly 7 menstruating women is clearly astrotheological. So I have issues just saying outright that Stonecoat was related to Bigfoot, but I do think that the booger dance probably was. Again, it's so old you can't tell. So that's probably something we're never going to know.